Welcome to Take Your Medicine podcast. My name is Philip Cowley. I've been a pharmacist for 25 years, and I used to think I was real smart until I started listening to my patients, and I realized the best wisdom you can gain is from the people that you talk to. Real people, real medical journeys, and from that wisdom is just huge. So today, I'm going to welcome Lauren Stewart. She is absolutely wonderful in every way. However, Lauren, I want to start out real quick. How long did you know your husband before you guys got married? Got engaged?
We dated from Monday to Friday, so 5 days, and we got engaged. And we knew each other a little bit longer after that because then we got married, like, a couple months later, but we only dated for 5 days before we were like, "Let's get married."
How many dates can you go on in 5 days?
Oh, we went on at least 1 date a day.
At least one.
At least one.
So
Mhm.
once you've met him, you guys have basically been inseparable since then. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, I was talking to him the other day, and we have not spent more than, like, 2 or 3 nights away from each other in 16 years.
16 years. See, this is the thing. So you're making me feel like my engagement was really long because I met Andrea in April and we didn't get engaged until school got out. So that would have been like the first week of June. And I always tell my
Um,
story as if it's like this really short period. I feel like we took too long listening to this.
no, you did take a long time. You were dragging your feet.
Absolutely. I had to
Just
get out of
kidding.
school because I had to go get a ring. So, there was that school got in the way. So
Yeah.
so your husband, what's his name? Sorry, I should
His
have
No, that's okay. So his name is Sean Stewart, and now I get to be a Stewart.
there we go, right? And you're like your Instagram presence is just amazing. Like, you've been doing this for a little while on Instagram from what I'm looking. I looked through a lot of them today.
Yeah, so for a really long time, I actually started sharing when I didn't realize I started as a blogger, and I thought it was a journal. I didn't realize people could read what I was writing and putting on the internet, and I was, like, deep in the trenches of infertility when this was happening, and I was like, "I started my period today, and I had to buy tampons," and I was mortified when I discovered that people could read it, you
Yeah,
know?
that's the very beginning when everybody was using it just for, like, their memory books. It was easier than doing
Uh-huh,
anything else, and
uh-huh.
it was so much better in a lot of ways back then because people just they were so real. It was before everybody knew they had to make it so pretty all the time.
Yeah, for sure.
I love that. I think that's fantastic. So you guys dated for 5 days, got
Yes.
engaged,
Yes.
and then you waited a whole about 90 days before you were married. Is that right?
Yeah, we got married so fast, and we figured the only time that would work, we probably would have gotten married sooner, but my parents and his parents, when we could all be in the same place at the same time, was the week of Thanksgiving, and so we got married the week before his first set of finals when he was in law school.
Oh, so first set of finals. So he was a little bit older, is that right?
Yeah, he was
For
25.
for Utah terms,
For
25
him
is
to
older, like,
He was
right?
such an old man.
And how old were you at the time? Because this is, like, something that, like, intrigues so many people we talk about. So, my wife and I, she was 19. We got
Mhm.
engaged when she was 18, and I was 22, and then I turned 23 right before. So but we've been married now 27 years. So
Oh, wonderful.
but it's one of those things I think it just intrigued people how fast it can go. So, how old were you when you guys
I
got
was
engaged?
21 and then happened to have a birthday in that, like, really short window, so when I got married, I was 22.
See, that's the thing. So, like, most people think about the stories where you have the LDS couples meet together, right? The Mormon marriage, and you're like, "Okay, she's barely out of high school and he's just off his mission." You guys had been out there, you know it was already out on the field. Maybe that's why it worked so well.
Yeah, I remember after I met him, Sean's personality is so, so unique, at least in my family. My family, the personalities are really dynamic, and there's a lot of, like, emotions that are kinda like this. Sean is just like this all the time. I think we had a baby, and he's just like this. He's got, like, this calming, like, wonderful, gentle personality, and I remember thinking, "Huh, I I can't go without him anymore." Just, like, his personality really settled me because 'cause I'm wound pretty tight, and he's just not.
Don't you think, though, that there's a lot to do with the commitment? Like, see, here's the thing. I was just talking to somebody else, and I know this is way deviant from where we're
That's
going.
so
We're
fun.
we're going into PCOS. We're gonna talk infertility, but a lot of time it's a mindset because I kind of read through, I've seen your whole story with your infertility, with PCOS, the whole thing. And what I see there is you have somebody who really needed somebody who was constant in their life in order to go through that whole system because it's a huge roller coaster, you know? And so I am underneath the belief system that what makes a marriage work or fail has more to do with the commitment too, and
Oh, yeah.
and the little things that work along the way. You start looking at somebody's marriages who struggle, and I think to myself, every marriage struggles the same in certain places. And then there's decisions to be made by the individuals that make it really hard. And I would never want to see inside of somebody else's houses. I wouldn't want to know their lives, but I just always look at someone and they say, well, you got married too fast or you should have taken longer. And I think, would that actually make marriages better?
So Sean always says, he's so smart. He's so smart. He's got the coolest brain, but he always says, he's like, you're going to change anyways. Like, you can't marry someone expecting them to stay the same. So if you felt like you needed however long of a lead up so you could know who they are, you have to still allow your partner to change and grow. And so to me, like, life was going to change and grow anyway. So I didn't need like that. I know I'm like, we got married so fast. So it is kind of the extreme on that end, but we have changed and grown so much. We would have changed and grown so much anyways, even in years leading up to getting married, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. I think even the couples that take a long time before they get married, what you'll see is that they're already adapting to their partner. And it's so hard to sacrifice some of the things. It's hard because people have so many hard decisions in their life, and there are lots of reasons why marriages fail, but for me, I always look at it and think, I don't think you can determine whether a marriage is going to be successful or a failure by the length of the engagement. I don't think that that's even a factor. I don't think that that would change anything.
Yeah, no, I agree with you so much.
In the world of pharmacy, being able to use the bathroom's a huge deal. Consistent, comfortable bowel movements are something that everybody struggles with at some point, and if you think you won't, well, sooner or later you will. The gold standard used to be polyethylene glycol, but there's been a huge push away from it. Polyethylene glycol helps drag water into the bowel, but it also causes huge problems. Inulax has come up with a solution. Now, Inulax has taken two types of fiber, a soluble and insoluble fiber, added some inulin to it, and then put aloe vera in it. Inulin works like polyethylene glycol, but it's just a natural sugar. So when you're looking to make sure everything keeps running fluidly and just like you like, Inulax is the very best way to go. And if you go to their website, inulax.com, and put in medicine 20, you get extra savings. So go to inulax.com now and save yourself trouble down the road. So there you are at 21, which means you're actually behind the curve a little bit. You
Yes.
should already have your first hair by Utah terms. And if you look on the blog, it starts pretty quick for you saying, hey, I've got to start looking at fertility issues, right?
Yeah, so with PCOS, I didn't start a cycle until I was like older. And my doctor had immediately put me on birth control because it was like a really heavy cycle and I was in a lot of pain. And they're like, oh, you need birth control. So at 17, they put me on birth control. And when we got married, we're like, well, we want to have kids. So we're not ever going to do birth control. Let's just have babies. And my cycles never came back after I got off of birth control at 22.
Now, that's like one of these things I always talk about. It's actually really disconcerting to me because the number of cases of PCOS that have occurred in later in life have almost doubled in the last 10 years. So it's one of these things that I think by the time it's all said and done, we're going to have half of all women have some level of PCOS.
Mhm.
I want to jump in this because you make your own soap. So this is really cool. Everybody's got to go look at her soap. It's Time Soap, but there's a Y. So it's time with a Y soap.com. And so I wanna lean into this, like, fairly early because I have to assume that PCOS and PCOD had a lot to do with why you guys got into that to begin with.
Yeah. So what we had found was that everything that we were putting into or on our bodies, the way we were treating our bodies, and I say we because I always include Sean in all of that, even though he wasn't the one dealing with it, he was helping me, that my body responded very strongly to anything that was going in that wasn't clean. So, food that I was eating, our soap. So, he had designed these soaps. There's like 7 ingredients and then they're all natural. And I mean, if you think about you're covered in skin from head to toe and everything that you put on your body is just soaking straight in. And I was trying everything because one of the things with PCOS is you can have really, really bad skin. Like I had masks of acne that were so bad that when someone would see me, they would be like, oh, like it would take them aback. It was so bad. And so I was trying lots of things. I was trying medicine. I was trying over the counter, like, and then prescription, so many things, and nothing got rid of it except for long term antibiotics. And so as we were trying to have a baby, it was so important to us that we just eliminated everything that we could that was within our control because the process was already so hard and there was so much outside of our control that we just felt like we had to do the best that we could. And that included what we were putting on our bodies.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of one of those things that initially, like if you when we talked about hormone disruptors and we talked about the estrogenic effects of a lot of different like soys and things like that. Well, you talked about that 15, 20 years ago. You were looked at a little bit like a kook initially. Like honestly, like people are like, whatever, that doesn't really make sense. It's interesting to see how mainstream the idea that our food is becoming our worst nightmare.
hmm Yeah, I feel like I can definitely tell it's easier for us actually here where we live to have like we get all of our meat from local farmers. We all of our produce is really, really fresh. And so it's easy for me to say, oh, you need to change and you need to get your meat from a farmer. You need to get everything local and clean. And I know that that can be really hard depending on where you live. But when I tell you it's worth it and the changes that you will see in your body from changing that, just changing to a locally sourced cow my energy levels, which was something I had never taken into consideration, my energy levels went from this to like this.
Right.
There was so many things besides just like creating a normal cycle for my body. My whole body felt better and was like, thank you for doing that.
It's just such an interesting thing. I don't want to get completely away from your story. I just wanted to like bring that in because it's just one of those things that if you would have told me at the beginning of being a pharmacist that I would be talking about before we fix with medications or whatever, we've got to look at your diet. How many Takis have you eaten today? How many Doritos have been down? You know what I mean? And I love all this stuff. I do, but I also have got to the point where I'm like, okay, I'm eating this knowing that there's going to be recourse. And I'll just
Mhm.
as and then you start weighing out whether it really was worth it later. So it's one of those things that is just intriguing to me. Right now, there's the lady who's pushing against Kellogg so hard in order to get all the dyes out. And there's a
Mhm.
huge part of me that thinks, when did we start needing to have something be bright blue for us to eat it anyway? Like that's just so
Oh,
weird
yeah.
that we needed it to begin with. Because if you see a fruit out in your tree or someplace on the grass that looks like all blue, you're like, okay, that one's gone bad really fast. But we put it
Yeah.
in our cereals all the time.
Mhm.
Been super intrigued. Okay, so there you are, 21, you just got married.
Mhm.
You decide you wanted to start having kids fairly early, and more importantly, you had to be like, one thing I always worry about with when I talk to somebody with PCOS at a young age is they don't understand any of it. So it's kind of a scary situation for a lot of girls when they first get told that.
Yeah, so it's interesting because my doctor didn't tell me what my diagnosis was. She just started having me do different things. I went into an OB-GYN in Provo, Utah, because that's where we were living. And the appointments were very fast. And I didn't get to ask questions about what she was telling me. She's like, okay, I'm going to put you on Clomid. I did not know what Clomid was. She didn't explain really what it was. She's just like, you're going to take it. But I wasn't having a cycle. So then I also had to be put on progesterone. And it was like, so there were so many things being thrown at me immediately with zero context. I had no idea what was going on. And then she added metformin, which when I went to pick up metformin from the pharmacist, he was like, okay, and started talking to me about diabetes. And he told me that I had diabetes at the pharmacy counter. And I called my mom. I was like, oh my gosh, mom, I have diabetes. I didn't know I had diabetes. My doctor didn't tell me I don't have diabetes, but it was a treatment for PCOS. And at the time, she still hadn't told me that I had PCOS, just that Clomid would help me so that I could have a baby,
Right.
which and it didn't. But
Well, and the metformin thing's such a tricky thing because it took a lot of years. So we dealt with a lot of infertility. So I was fairly sensitive to it. So when I had somebody coming in with Clomid and metformin, I already knew what it was. But it's
so
interesting how many people got put on medications or still do
mhm,
out of pure. Well, and I think we should trust our doctors, but I think
mhm.
it's also okay to trust your doctor enough to say, I don't understand. What are we doing here?
Yeah, I feel like my doctor, where they were, they saw so many patients and so many women that were just having babies. It was, like I said, it was right in Provo. And eventually it got to the point where my questions I could tell were really bothering her. And we'd been trying for a while. Like we started trying immediately. So then 6 months in, that's when they really starting to prescribe you medications. And she didn't have any of the monitoring capability to like check my ovaries and see what was actually going on. But she never went into details of like there are specialists who actually can monitor you, who are specifically for trying to have babies, not just delivering babies or like your yearly or bi-yearly pap smear or whatever. There are people that are there to help you. And they never told me anything. They didn't give me any other like outlet or information. And at that time, this was in 2009, 2010. Also, so 2008, 9, and 10, people were not talking about this on the internet. This was not like, oh, I could open my phone and do a little bit of research. People were not talking about it. And she basically was so sick of my questions. She's like, well, you're just depressed and I can give you depression, like to prescribe anxiety meds, or you just need to get a puppy. Like this is getting really, like it was too much for her that I was having a hard time with it.
Well, and they lean really quickly, and you can't get pregnant if you're stressed. It's almost like they put this guilt and
Hmm.
shame on the patient. Like we heard
Hmm.
it a bunch of times, and
Yeah.
I look back at it, and I think to myself, I don't blame the individual, the physician. I actually blame the whole system because they get
Hmm.
paid to deliver babies, and then like
Hmm.
it's almost like a side gig. They do gynecology work. Like it's almost like
Hmm.
it's not even like the combination seems to be detrimental. I never had to go to an OB-GYN, but I have noticed that they seem to really be more OB than they are GYN in most cases.
Yeah, that is definitely how I felt across the board, really.
It's just such an interesting thing because the more women that I talk to, the more women who have a story of an OB-GYN that kind of wrecked them, at least for a little while, till they got it back on their feet.
We have, I think you and I had talked about this a little bit before. I've been through so many OBGYNs that it's, I mean, 10 OBGYNs. I have seen so many doctors. And I found that for me, again, I think it's the system and it's the way that it's all put together and the way that they make their money. But I found that nobody was going to advocate for me or push for me or have the same urgency that I felt because all I wanted was to be a mother. And that's a wonderful thing. But the urgency that I felt was never matched until I found a reproductive specialist and I was able to change the entire experience because I was going to someone who was there to solve my problem, which even still, it wasn't solving all the symptoms of PCOS. They weren't changing all the symptoms. She finally was able to help me have a baby, but even still, none of the symptoms were treated or
Right.
taken care of.
The core problem is often overlooked. So I do want to give a shout out to all the good OBs out there
Uh,
because the thing is
yeah.
they're really, really good at what they do when they do OBs. It's just that they don't get reimbursed. I would love to see a system in which patient satisfaction played into how well the doctor got reimbursed because that would
Mhm,
take those people who always wanted to help people and it would be
mhm,
financially beneficial
mhm.
for them to help somebody. Right now, if you don't deliver 8 babies this week, you can't pay your staff, and so the
Oh,
whole system is just kind of a wreck,
yeah. Yeah, that's awful.
like, just awful, but I do think what you brought up with the fact that they don't look like we always look at like, most of the medicine that we talk about, it's all a Band-Aid approach. We don't really go into the core, why is this happening?
Mhm,
Instead, we're like, "Okay, let's just get you to the end goal, let's not worry about why," and I think that that's a huge point to be made up because if you knew your body's menstrual cycle, a cycle that should be core to everything that is being human, isn't
mhm,
working, it should be setting off alarms
mhm,
that I'm gonna have more problems down the road. This is just the first alarm going off before the big flood comes in.
mhm. Yeah, I had not one doctor mention to me, and I have actually had, I should stop and say, I have had wonderful OBGYNs. Like, this sounds like I haven't, but I really have had wonderful OBGYNs. And I remember when my OBGYN later on, when we'd moved from, because we've moved a lot of times. But when we were in Maryland, that's the first time that a doctor had told me that it was a problem that I wasn't having a cycle, beyond the fact that I just couldn't have a baby, that it was bad for my body. No one had ever said that to me before.
I had a girl come in once and she'd been to the OB and she'd been other places and she was looking for some iron and she said, "Can I just ask you a question?" And to be honest, this was like it's weird because there you are, a male pharmacist inside of a store with other people around and they get so
Mhm.
desperate. She said, "Is it normal to bleed for 3 months?"
Oh,
And
'cause that's
I said, "Absolutely not." And she goes, "Well, I
so
told my OB and they weren't concerned." I'm like, "Well," and I didn't know who their OB was. I didn't know everything else. I said, "I don't have all the details, but nobody should be bleeding for 3 months. Like, that's not a normal thing.
Mhm.
There's a problem." So it's
Yeah.
funny how often the OB understands what's going on. These doctors do, and they're probably right. They probably had something in place, they'd figured it out, but they don't disseminate that information to a patient. And that's a really disconcerting, like, I see so many people who just beg for knowledge, and that's what you kinda gave them inadvertently because that's the time when you went on Instagram way back when, right?
Mhm. Mhm. So, I felt like it was so hard for me that if I just told one person that she needed to find a new doctor and it helped her have a baby, that it was okay that I had to wait so long to have my babies. Like, I started posting it online, and I remember it the feedback from people was either really wonderful or like, "You cannot talk about that on the internet." It was like a mix of both, but I found that the ones who were just so grateful that I was willing to share what I had to do to get the care that I needed and to have my babies. So I talked about everything. And I definitely know that my my doctors didn't always love that because they found it online, but I needed that community and I felt like that community needed me so that we could share it.
Do you think that things have got better? So we dealt with it with infertility quite a bit too, and I was always very outspoken in the pharmacy, but I stayed away from social media because I've been told that it's the devil and we had to stay away from it.
Yeah.
So, you know
Yeah.
what I mean? I'm like, and then I got on social media. I'm like, I don't know where the devil's at because this is just
Yeah.
awesome. But
Mhm.
but I think that people like you that have went out initially now, before we move forward, it's Lauren's doing living, and she's got all sorts of really cool stuff. You get to see her whole journey. It's great. But do you think things have got better? Like, have you found a lot of good support now online? Are you part of groups that help people with this?
So, yes. So I felt like we needed something more personal than just Instagram. So when I was doing treatments, I always opened up a Facebook group so that women who were also doing treatments could have a sounding board that wasn't just me. So they could also find each other and talk to each other. So Facebook groups I feel like were a huge um stress reliever and, like, saving grace for me when I felt like even though my husband was trying so hard to understand, he wasn't the one injecting his belly, and he
Well, we
wasn't
can't
the
get
one
it
who
anyway. Like, I was there.
No.
Like, there's a
Yeah.
reason why men that go to battle only wanna talk about being in battle with somebody else who's been there. And
Yeah.
it plays the same for women in fertility because I can say, "I'm so sorry, and I love you," as many times as I want, and you
Mhm.
just don't get it.
No, and it's so hard, and on top of that, you're pumping yourself full of hormones, so you're gonna have a harder time anyways.
Yeah.
But I felt like there is such a huge support network online, which was so crazy to me because I was told by people, probably people closer to me, like in real life, that it was inappropriate or that it was like just such an overstep or an overshare or something that you would just do for attention when clearly, like, they don't understand that you had felt so alone at some point with just hoping that you could find someone who could relate to you, that you don't care if it seems that way to other people, you will stand up and speak up for people who can't share it online, and that's what I did.
Don't you think that that term, "Don't share your dirty laundry," remember when that was like a
Mhm.
big
Oh,
push?
yeah.
And I
Yeah.
always thought to myself, what one person's dirty laundry is somebody else's saving grace. Like,
Mhm.
that's not a fair play because you haven't when you talk to somebody who's got, like, suicide ideation, they feel like their ideation is dirty laundry,
Mhm.
and
Oh.
that's so dangerous because, you probably shouldn't be sharing everything all of the time, but there probably are areas and groups that you can share almost anything to once you find them.
Mhm. Oh, no, I agree, and I feel like what a blessing that I mean, the internet has, good and bad as with really everything, it depends on how you use it, but the idea that you can find a group of women to say and I really liked local groups of women because they could say, "Don't use this OB," or "Use this OB," or, "We had this experience here, but our friends have gone and they've said it's been okay." Finding that doctor and finding that fit, actually, I found a lot of that information from, being online.
And how much of that really has changed the way that you see medicine? Like for me, it's the other individuals. Like I start this podcast by saying that I thought I knew all this stuff and then I talk to people. That's really what I've figured. The more people I talk to, the more I always medicine is like a gumbo. Like you've got to throw everything in the pot. If you
Mhm.
only have one flavor, it tastes terrible. You have to
Mhm.
put them all in there. You have to have the little kooky in there. because it gives you flavor, but not too much kooky because there's too much flavor. And you need some of the potatoes, which is just the boring, like normal stuff, like just the run of the mill, just go to the OB, take your Clomid. But I feel like even more than finding good doctors, finding good people in your life is almost more important in learning about who you are and what you need from a healthcare standpoint.
Oh, for sure. And I feel like there's things that like you've heard the saying, you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah,
So that was so huge for us. I mean, just the idea that I didn't know there was a reproductive specialist. Like, are you kidding me? How could I not know that?
right.
But I didn't.
Well, and then you jump into the fact that even with reproductive specialists, you're like, there's some of them that are just cookie cutter. They're gonna put you in, and there's others that'll sit with you, and the idea that you don't have to stay with one doctor is that thing we all have to learn, I think. The idea that I love you as a person, you're probably a great
Mhm,
doctor for other people, but for me, I'm going
mhm,
elsewhere, that's
mhm.
well within your rights. Seems like something people just have to get their head wrapped around.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times it feels like it's too much work to change doctors because you kind of like, even if they send over your records, it feels like you're starting over. But that's okay because what if you didn't start over, or what if you did start over and that is like at the point where everything shifted for you and you have a doctor that you can relate to and understands and treats you as a person with a soul and feelings, because especially where you're speaking about mental health, but with infertility, it's so personal and it's so scary, and you're giving them like all of your hopes and dreams. It's like, please just help me.
Right. Half the time you just need to say, "We're gonna figure it out. This will be okay. We'll find something
Mhm,
for you." Because, you get to that point with infertility and you get it with everything, but for my wife and I had a while where we disagreed because I was ready to adopt, and
mhm,
I didn't understand, and I still don't think I could, what it meant to her when I said, "Let's just adopt. We can get babies anyway." And that
mhm.
to me, that was a very insensitive thing that I said to her. Now, when I said it, it wasn't, but now I'm like, "Oh, no wonder she was angry."
That's so hard because I feel like as a husband, your job is to be the fixer, right?
Yeah.
Like, okay, this is causing my wife so much grief. I've got to solve this problem for her. And then I have actually talked to Sean and I actually were also going to adopt. We had had like 4 failed cycles and we went to adopt, and the mom and the baby actually were in a car accident and we lost
Oh.
everything at that point. I mean, I felt like every door was shut. We were never going to have kids. Like
No,
it
that
was,
that felt personal there. It's almost like God was saying
yeah.
no. Like, that for real, I would have walked away from there saying, "I think that means no." And that would
That's
have
what
been
I felt
hard,
like.
like, that would have been just so crushing.
It was really hard for us, but then I feel like also to remember, like, adoption is a whole thing in and of itself and so separate from infertility. It's involves so many people and so many other things that I feel like it does seem to be a catch-all for women who can't have children, like, "Oh, you should definitely adopt." And I feel like there is a calling for so many people to do that, but also not everyone is called to adopt, and so that's tricky,
It's
you know?
such a different game. Like, we looked at it pretty close too, and I know a lot of people that have adopted and a lot of people that had kids and adopted, and those parents are an amazing, but they're not, they're a different breed, they're built different because of what
Mhm,
comes their way. If you're gonna go into that adoption, you better really talk to people in groups that have done that. Here's what you
mhm,
expect, here's the
mhm.
pitfalls, because it's its own ball of wax.
Yeah, it is. It's not a guaranteed that you will actually end up with a baby then either. Uh,
No, and then you have to
yeah.
also, there's so many things to play. Like, this still goes back to the idea that you empower yourself and you get people who are, especially people that are local, so when you do adopt, you can call somebody and
Mhm.
say, "Okay, what am I gonna, like, is this normal? The dad's reaching out to me," or whatever it may be still.
Yeah. Yeah, I have a friend who has gone through and she's had a handful of adoptions that have just last minute the birth family has changed their minds or something, and she's been through this so many times that it's just like your heart is so broken, and at what point do you protect yourself and say, "No, we're not gonna do this anymore?"
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely. Now, I love the fact that you went through 10 different OBs. So when now as an expert, a 10, you're an expert.
I am.
When you go into an OB's office, what do
Mhm.
you, any physician really, but we're going to talk OBs because you're an expert here.
Yeah.
What would you tell people to look for in their physician? Like, you've done this enough now where the first time it was tricky. By the 10th time, you're like, you know what? I can break up with this doctor in 10 minutes if I need to, and find a
Mhm.
new one. So
No,
walk them
fair.
through what they need to
Mhm.
know, how they
'Kay.
figure out whether it's a good doctor or a bad doctor, what you would suggest to them, because I think that skill set you have is huge.
No, thank you. So, okay, I think it is so important to have a referral. Not necessarily, and not a referral from a doctor, like, oh, you need a referral to go to this doctor. I mean, get your girlfriend's ears and ask them who they went to, what they liked about it. Talk to them about their care before you do anything, or in a local Facebook group. So that's one of the reasons I love the Facebook group setting, is because women talk and women will tell you about their experience, whether it was good, whether it was bad. And so for me, if I had women who were willing to recommend a doctor for a pregnancy or something along the lines where it's so personal, that was always the best first step for me, not just looking on Google and finding a doctor that was as close as possible to me. So that was the first thing, was a referral. And the next thing that I found, and I feel like this can work across the board with multiple doctors. So like if you are in the military and you do have more limited resources with who you can see, is that I found that even if the doctor and I weren't a perfect match, I had a better experience if I set the expectation that I needed to be able to ask questions at the end of the visit.
I love this. Okay, so this is like a big thing I always tell everybody. You should never go into a doctor's office without having 5 to 10 questions written out that you wanna make
Mhm.
sure you get answered.
I have my journal. That's what I do.
That is such good advice. So listen to that 100%. Okay, so now we're asking people who've been there, and
Mhm.
we're going in with expectations.
Mhm. So when you go in and you have your appointment set, I appreciate a doctor who agrees with that and says, yes, okay, that's fine. When you come in, I know I'll make sure I set aside 5 to 10 minutes at the end of our visit. And I can tell you that I have actually not had a bad experience since I set that expectation with my doctor. So for me, those 2 things were so important, and going off that first referral. And the next one is, I don't expect my doctor to be perfect. I think it would set us up for failure if we're like, "Well, I'm not a perfect person, but I expect this doctor to be 100% perfect at everything." They can't be. There's no way. It's like when you're a teenager and you realize your parents don't actually know everything, but they're trying really hard.
Right.
You gotta give your doctor that same, and I don't mean like with negligence or with anything like that, but it's okay for them to have to do research for you. They say they don't know the answer to the question you're asking, but they will figure it out and you guys will make a game plan about whatever that question is. Someone who actively shows how willing they are to work with you so that your care is like at the forefront of your appointments with them.
See, I love that too because I think most physicians want that. I think most doctors and most they want that because it allows them room to grow within the relationship because
Mhm.
the doctor patient is a relationship and giving them that room to grow makes them feel what you don't want to do is have somebody come in, they say, we're going to try this, and then turn around and say, well, Google says right to
Mhm.
their face. Instead, if you go in and say, this is what I'm expecting, and they say, we're going to try this, and you come back and say, it didn't work, and they're like, okay, let's try this. That feels like a relationship. I think that it's a kind of a two-way street because I think people get so burned out on the medical system. They come in both guns loaded, ready to go at their doctor, and they expect something different sometimes. And it's not a surprise to me that it turns out poorly in those situations.
Yeah, I just think it's so important, especially the world that we live in right now. It seems everyone is held to such a high standard that they forget that like it's impossible for people to be perfect. And so if you go in with an open mind and you communicate that you want to be active in your care, I feel like the experience is just going to be so, so, so much better for both you and your doctor. I feel like your doctor will be so like, they will love treating you. They will love being able to care with you, and they will care when you hit those success milestones with your whatever it is that you are working on with them.
For sure. So I gotta get to your story because we're gonna run out of time because
Okay.
we've gone so far.
Sorry.
Okay, so there you are at 21. How long
Okay.
did it take to get your first baby?
So we had our first baby 3 years later.
Oh, that's a long time. That's how long we went on our first 2. Did you
Yeah,
have to do if I can ask, did you have to
you
do
can ask.
IVF the first time around?
So we have thankfully actually been able to do IUIs, but I have to do a load of injections. My follicles just like do not grow. And you know that once they start growing, if it's like more than one is growing with PCOS, a lot of them will grow.
Yeah.
So we've had lots of canceled cycles, lots of cycles that took, I think my ovulation, when you take the ovulation injection, I
Yeah.
think it was like on day 59 with Chase, my first baby.
Oh, really? So
I mean,
you
and
were
it
on
was.
FSH and LH for that long. So
So
your
long.
belly would have been, like, distended by that point. You would have been
Oh,
so overstimulated, it would have been like, you would have been able to, like, grapefruit size ovaries at that point.
yeah, and I've had with PCOS, you have to be so careful because if you stimulate it too much and then everything's hyperstimulated, and I have actually had that where I had both my ovaries were the size of footballs.
Yeah. Takes so long to get down.
Oh, so bad, and I was pregnant with the twins at the time, so it was like so I was in so much pain, but that's actually I found out that I was having twins in the hospital by myself because I went in for overstimulated ovaries.
Well, I mean, honestly, if you're gonna get notice that you have overstimulated ovaries, the best way to just find out you're pregnant. So,
You're
especially
pregnant.
with twins, because at that point you're like, maybe this game can finally be over too, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
It's so hard that cycle. I hate that cycle where that ups and downs and you get just so used to disappointment. Okay, so you had Chase, he was
Mhm.
13 now, right?
Yeah.
Now you've got a total of 5 kids, is that correct?
Yes. So I have 5. So I've done treatments for every single one of my babies. So Chase took me 3 years and a lot of failed cycles. And in that time, we also had the adoption that we had been pursuing. With Lila was just a miracle. We had our insurance was changing. So Sean worked for the government for a really long time, and our insurance was phenomenal at the time. And when the Affordable Care Act went into place, we got a notice saying that starting in 2014, our infertility coverage was going to be completely taken away. So if I did not get pregnant that month, it was in November. I got pregnant in November of 2013. That was like my last try. Or otherwise, we would have had to pay for it out of pocket. And I don't know if you know what they pay staffers on the Hill, but there's no way we could have afforded having children at that point.
No, if you stay clean on the hill, there's no money there. So I've always
No,
curious
and
about the people. Some people make a lot of money up there. I'm like, yeah, I've seen they
no,
publicly give out staffers numbers. Like, you know what
yes,
people make. I'm like,
yeah.
doesn't make any sense. So anyway, that's a whole other. We'll just leave that to the side. So
Yeah, it was yeah, so hard and to raise a family on it. So people obviously thought we were nuts and nobody out there has kids that young. So my fertility doctor was like, "Okay, we're going to try really hard and we'll try to get you pregnant because in January your coverage is gone." So we got pregnant with Lila on one try, which never again and never before had ever even crossed my mind that I could just try to get pregnant and have a baby.
right.
Even though it was still with medication.
So
Yeah.
Lila's your number 2, is that right?
Yeah, so Lila is number 2. So at this point, I had 1 boy and 1 girl, and this is actually where I began I felt like I had more issues with OBs after I had 1 boy and 1 girl because where we lived, that was perfect, and you shouldn't want any more kids, and you should be done.
Yeah.
So my next OB, I started trying when Lila was 1, and there is a 5-year age gap between Lila and Dawson.
Uh,
So Dawson took me a really long time, but I went to an OB, and she was like, "Why are you even here? You have 2 kids. You have 1 boy and 1 girl, and that's perfect. You should be done." And she didn't want to help me at all.
which is, what I love about your story is you're like, okay, you don't want to help me. I'm on my way to the next one. And how important that is to say, you're still a good person. You're still a good
Yep,
doctor.
yep,
I'm going to go find somebody new. Like, if I was going to say anything with Lauren's story, I would say it's keep looking because it's
mhm,
so important that you just said, okay, good for you.
mhm,
I'm out.
yeah. I mean, and to her, like, it was very black and white. It wasn't an offensive thing. She wasn't trying to be rude. She wasn't mad at me for wanting more kids. It wasn't supposed to be like anything other than you do have 2 kids. You have a 1 boy and 1 girl. That should be so fine. And for me, coming from the background that I come from a huge family, and so does Sean, and we both wanted more children. And so I just felt like, okay, so I'll find someone who is a little bit of a better fit for me. So I did change OB-GYNs again there. And then I changed OB-GYNs again one more time because he retired. He was older. He was a little bit more old school, and I really loved him. And I wish that he would have stayed practicing because I felt like he would have been such a good fit. But and then we also moved. So we changed OBs again. And again, well, there's a 5-year age gap between Lila and Dawson. So I did this for a really long time. And during this time is when I discovered online, I finally started seeing people talking about what you're eating, what you're putting in your bodies, getting exercise. And I'm a pretty active person. Like, I love to work out. I did mixed martial arts for a long time. Like, I feel like I can really get stuff done physically. I'm pretty strong and I enjoy that part of my life. But it wasn't something I'd ever seen of in conjunction with infertility.
Right. Well, and it's funny because they don't speak of it that way either. They almost keep it completely separate. And this is a huge thing. So this is why I'm bringing back again. The company's called Time Soap, Tyme Soap, and the reason why I love it is because it's only got 7 ingredients. Because I'm sure you've done what I've done, and you look at the back of a soap ingredient and you're like, there are seriously 52 ingredients in this. What did they even do?
And you can't say any of them.
No,
And
and if you do know what they are, they make you more concerned because I'm
yeah.
looking at it and saying, okay, there's a benzene group in this. Why did they even put that in there? Like that for me at my end. So I've learned
Mhm.
not to read them if I don't want to know because
Yeah.
it's almost worse.
Yeah, sometimes ignorance feels like bliss, doesn't it?
Well, unless you're willing to make the change. I mean, that's the thing that
Yeah.
makes it hard. So you guys decided, hey, we're going to make this change. But what you did, you were working in a bank. He's up in intelligence, right? Is where he was at.
Yeah, so he worked on the Hill, he worked for 2 different senators and a congressman, and then he went and he worked with the government, essentially with the military. And I believe it was probably the most soul-sucking 5 years of his life was this, even though working on the Hill is terrible because it's, like, so corrupt and or it's like a power vortex of ugh.
Yeah.
Like, you can feel it when you get off the plane in DC.
Yes.
It's crazy. I really appreciate that he was able to stick it out because the insurance benefits, even though we did lose a lot of benefits in 2013, it was still better than, private insurance and what we would have been stuck with. So,
But see, that's the thing. So we all hit these catalysts in life. So there's Shauna, and he's got this job, and it's fine. And he could have done it for
mm,
25 years and gotten his retirement and been
yeah,
fine.
could have.
But you guys didn't want to be fine. And it's funny how sometimes you have to get to that point where
Mhm,
I don't care if we're broke. I don't care what happens. I just can't do this
mhm.
anymore. Because if not, we don't make change.
For sure. So, very interesting. In During COVID, they shut everything down on the East Coast, and it was shut down so, like, for 2 years. I mean, it was a really long time everything was shut down, and they shut down his offices, and he was not allowed to go to work. And during this time, we decided we're gonna buy a farm, and we sold our house that was in the city, moved out to a farm, started milking our goats, started making our soaps, and changed our entire lives. It was, like, such a huge catalyst for us. And then that's when the twins came.
One thing I really do love is that every one of your babies came through infertility treatment one way or the other. So
Mhm.
you made these lifestyle changes and you started seeing your skin get better. You started feeling better. But even at that, you still did everything you could on a natural thing, knowing you had to lean on the medical system too. I love the fact that you wanted to intertwine everything you could do. You're eating more natural. You're using soaps that you should be using. You're using cosmetics. You watch out for the soda, which we all love, but you also know exactly what's in it.
Mhm.
But you did that, plus you did the medical treatment. I think that's a big lesson that I think all of us can learn from.
I think it for me, the steps that I needed to take in order to have my children, I was willing to do whatever it was that I needed to do to completely, like, change my life in such a way where my meals were harder, eventually that's not the case, right? Eventually it gets easier as you know what to look for and how to prep your meals and how to cook these things that are and what to look for in the supermarket. But then even though that didn't 100% fix what I had was years of, I feel like, build up in my body that I don't know the cause of PCOS. I can't begin to say that I do, but I feel like the way I treated my body before I made these changes has a lot to do with the way that my body still responds now. But needing medication was not a bad thing. Needing to have a little bit extra help was not a bad thing. And I think that's something like in the crunchy community online, it's all or nothing. And I think that that is silly. I think that it is such a gift to have modern medicine as well as the knowledge of how we can change what we're doing at home to help modern medicine help us.
Absolutely. So I have 2
Okay.
first of all,
Um,
the most important thing is you have so much you can share with all of us. So how do they find you? What's the best way to look you up so they can find you?
Okay, so I am on Instagram so much. That's the best spot. So Lauren.Stewart.living. Lauren Stewart Living on Instagram. And then Time Soap, just Time Soap on Instagram as well. That is where I am. I am really, really good about my DMs, especially on Time Soap. It's easier because it's a smaller following. So the DMs are easier to filter through there. But if you have questions or if you are in the trenches of infertility and you want to talk to someone, that is something that I make it my utmost priority. If I'm ever going to give my time away from my family, it's going to be for something that is just as important. And to me, women out there who are trying to have babies or who are struggling with miscarriage and things like that, that is what I would hope that that you can find me. And I would love to talk to you through that.
See how awesome she is? She's just so awesome. Okay, last question I ask everybody. When I went on social media, I did it to save my pharmacy, and then we started getting a following. Had a
Mhm,
friend say to me, "You have to find a platform." He said, "You have a voice, now you need a platform. What do you really want from this?"
mhm,
I thought to myself, "I can't change the world, but I can make it 1% kinder."
mhm.
The last question I ask everybody is, what advice do you give to people who are listening on how to make the world just 1% kinder?
Oh, I believe that the way that you treat your children is going to be an extension of you. And so if you remember to speak with kindness and less sharpness, you are raising children who are quite literally going to be going out into the world and making it better. So just love your family harder and don't forget that even though someone looks like they might not be having a hard time, chances are in this day and age, there is something going on. So kindness and love go such a long way.
There was advice was given in early on when we were kids. When me and my wife were kids, we hadn't even had any yet, and they told us that don't be surprised when your kids yell all the time if you're yelling at your kids all the time. And I thought to myself, the way that you speak to your children, it reflects it. So when I find somebody whose children are just extraordinarily kind, you know the parents are there too.
Hmm.
Well,
For
thank you
sure.
so much. Make sure you check it out. Go look at Time Soap. Look at her Instagram, Lauren Stewart Living. There's dots in between there. Go see her. And most of all, thank you for spending the time with us today.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's like such a joy to chat with you.
Well, if you enjoyed the podcast, this is Take Your Medicine podcast. Give us a subscribe, like it, give a review, and we'll be back next week as well.